So very, very much for this heartwarming reception of me. It's partly emotional. My wife has explained a lot about the folklore and culture of Ireland in a way that has made me very curious to come here. This is the first time I'm in Ireland. And I loved it already from all the stories I've heard from my wife. Then I have read about your planning, and I've heard the introduction from the city manager and from John. And when I read all these things, it strikes me what an honor it is to come here. All the essentials have already been said. The need to change deeply in order to not destroy the pleasures of future populations anywhere in the world. And to do so stepwise, to enjoy even small change, and to that endeavor, knowing exactly where we want to end up in the end, in sustainability. In an attractive, sustainable Dublin, in an attractive, sustainable world. And to that end, we must have robust definitions that we can use as a language we are using. Because when we meet together to solve problems together, we are taking so many assumptions for granted, such as that we understand each other. But that's only because we speak English. Om jag skulle fortsätta så här på svenska så skulle ni ha väldigt svårt att förstå vad jag säger. Which is, if I would continue like this, it would be a bit difficult for you to hear what I'm saying because I'm speaking Swedish. But it's not only language. There are a few other things which is brought about by language, such as the perception of the conservation laws, thermodynamics, certain aspects of the human being as an inherently social species. There are a number of knowledges that we need not debate, that has got nothing to do with left and right on the political scale. And to master those kinds of understanding, such as the language and certain constituents that are directly related to sustainability, we can reach much, much further in a systematic approach. And we can also identify where the polarities are. Many people believe that a consensus approach won't work in the end because we have different values. Nothing could be more wrong than that. If we have a consensus approach based on solid understanding of language, solid understanding of the natural scientific worldview, we can push the boundaries for what need not be debated much further to really identify the true polarities that are truly based on value differences. But why basing polarities on poor knowledge? Why basing it on sloppy system boundaries? Why basing it on misunderstandings of each other? So when I see what you have already set out to do, it's like a beautiful story, and what the world needs today more than anything else is role models. And I would like you to add one aspect even clearer in your plan. That would be to influence others to follow your example. If you are really doing what you have set out to do, it should be an active part of your planning is to extend your knowledge and your learnings to others, because that's what we need today more than anything else. I will now talk about not so much the Natural Step. It's true, I founded that organization. It's an NGO, and it was only founded to facilitate the development of a consensus dialogue amongst scientists and decision makers in business and policies. So it's a sort of movement that we have been part of creating, but today we have so many more organizations part of that movement that the Natural Step is only one contributor. And what we have published belongs to the public domain. So if you would like to have nothing to do with the Natural Step, you can still use science publications, doctoral dissertations, whatever you need. And we are set up to help you regardless if we are official partners or not. We are here to help you by providing the documents we have, case studies we have. So it's an open source. So I'm not here to sell anything. I would like to say that up front. Now let's proceed to what I mean by this. Why is this more about competence than values? Because if we go down to that level again, what we can agree on from scientific point of view, we are in a funnel where the resource potential to sustain us is systematically declining. no matter how we vote in parliament and so forth. So there is less and less room for maneuver left to live prosperous lives and to have pleasures in the future. That's a fact, and I will soon return to that. If you are now leading an organization, say selling bicycles, or a bank, or you're a mayor of Toronto, I don't know, it doesn't matter. But you are in charge, and you don't understand the nature of the threats that the whole system is put under. You don't understand that. How can you then become a good leader? If you are leading a big, complex organization in a big system which is under systematic decline, and you don't understand the features of that, how can you then lead your own complex organization? And the funny thing is today that most decision makers in the world don't have a clue how to define what sustainability entails, what it is, how to define it. They don't know what it is. How can you then be strategic if you don't know what it is you're aspiring to? The general solution to that dilemma, because they feel it, people are sensitized today, they turn to experts like myself. And if you like nuclear power, because you've always said that, in the sauna and having a whiskey with your friends, you love nuclear power, then you can always find yourself a scientist who says that nuclear power is better than fossil fuels, and then you rely on that guy. And vice versa, if you like biofuels, and you've always loved biofuels, and you've said so to all your pals, you can always find yourself an expert who verifies also that standpoint. Which means that scientists are taken hostages in inherently ideological claims, and this is a battle we cannot win. Furthermore, experts are amateurs on leading complex organizations in the complex world. That's what decision makers are doing. They are the experts on being strategists. So they must know how to define sustainability themselves, and thereby asking the right questions to experts, not trying to take experts hostages in ideologically shaped processes, which is extremely dangerous. And it all comes down to three very simple questions, in line with what the city manager said. Make it simple, and these are the three. If you only ask the first question to an executive today, you get a long, long story. Sustainability has come to stay. It makes perfect ethical sense. Why wasting resources? That's not good for nature, nor is it good for money, and so forth. It's just a long story. It's not a definition. So if you then, after that long story about the policies that have evolved accordingly, ask the second question. So, relying on your own definition, what remains to be done in your organization? They don't know how to respond, since they don't have a definition. And furthermore, they don't do enough with regard to the third question. By the way, I see a number of people taking notes, and that's fine for those of you who like taking notes. Some people find it easier to listen, but I have actually taken those notes. So I have a little PDF file with slides to the left and with an effective manuscript to the right, so that you can read this yourselves. You don't need to take notes unless you like. Okay? Now, to be able to respond to complex questions of that kind in a complex system we are right now in, I have two nice stories about systems thinking. One is good and one is bad. The good one is that you as individuals were born systems thinkers. You are extremely smart, each one of you, when it comes to playing chess, once you've done it for a few times. If you've done it enough, computers find it extremely difficult to beat you. Or running cars in the complex traffic system, or learning your first language, which is an incredible achievement each one in this room has done, because you didn't even have a language to begin with. So you have decodified your first language by just being around and hearing sounds and doing the right connections. The sad part of the story is that groups larger than 5, in spite of the ingenuity of each individual, generally are dumber than the dumbest participant of the whole group. Well, not here in Dublin, but we have this problem in Stockholm. The larger the assembly, the more stupid it gets when it comes to dealing with complex issues, complex matters. Now, that is very sad in Sweden and Stockholm, because many people inherently knows more together than each individual. So we always, without exception, have a greater collective knowledge in a big group than in a small group, or only one by one. The problem is that we can't make use of that collected knowledge because we don't have shared mental models of what it's all about. It's like having a bunch of people playing with a ball, but they have different ideas what football is all about. Or sitting and moving pieces randomly, but because they don't know the rules of chess. And that's not fun. So we must have a structure, the trunk and the branches, for us to be able to do division of labor amongst the leaves and all the details of relationships. If I ask an individual, say a competitive business person, an executive in the United States, having been brought up under the most aggressive, competitive business climate anywhere, one with an attitude of business is war and sustainability is for sissies. They don't exist in Ireland, but they have them in the United States. If you ask this same person, sir, it's generally sir, what do you think about forests? Do you think that we have at last have stopped losing them on the global scale, or do you think that we still may lose some? He generally knows the answer. If you ask him about agriculture, cropland, topsoil layers, nutrients, biodiversity of cropland, he knows that too, but by just being around, watching the news every now and then, listening, putting things together, he knows that as well. Groundwater tables, fisheries, do you think at last that coral reefs have stopped declining, or do you think that fisheries may decline a bit? I mean, on an average, globally. They generally know the answer. They know the answers. They know the answers. We are in a funnel where the resource potential of the whole system to sustain us is systematically on the decline. And I think the most spooky parts of the funnel are the gradual loss of stories of meaning that create the glue between people, the cultural glue, those stories that connect us, that makes it important to be Irish. One of the things that had been moving me so much about Ireland long before I was here, which is the first time today, was the stories from my wife who told me about all those stories of connectedness and that it meant something to be Irish. And that responded very well to me, because when I've been out traveling, I've met so many Irish people, and they are generally extremely proud of being Irish. It's important to be Irish. Actually, those stories are on the decline, and it's more and more one person to him or herself and the family. So we are more and more alienated from other people, and the social connectedness is eroding at the time when we need it more than ever. So we need stories of meaning, such as saving the world together. Now, the systematic decline of resource potential to sustain us has led to a number of repercussions in the system as we see it. If you go to the United States, where people have been much behind the European community, including Ireland, if you look at the change from 1980 until today, people saying that they are actually acting to save the planet has been around 80%. But doing it with the actual choices with our wallet was only 10% only a few years ago. Today, that has doubled. Doesn't look much. Yeah, whatever. 10%, 20%. Well, to the business community, that's huge. That's huge. They think that it's an avalanche coming, and it keeps on growing. If you look at the economists, you can look at a hardcore World Bank's leader, Stern, who is not an environmentalist, doing some rough conservative calculations about climate change. And mitigating now use of fossil fuels will cost around 1% of GDP, but the outcome is likely to be huge with regard to the profit from that kind of investment. Whereas if we wait, the cost of GDP will, in conservative numbers, go up to 5 to 20% of GDP, and it will lead us to the worst global depression ever. And that created an enormous fuzz around these issues, such as, same country again, United States. This note slide, by the way, is now 700 mayors signing off on Kyoto targets, though the White House were reluctant to do so. And there are even associations of states, both on the West Coast and on the East Coast, where they are systematically moving towards a cap-and-trade system to phase out fossil fuels completely, and to not go for nuclear power instead, but renewable energy, and energy-saving systems. What about investors? I think they have been the last to react all around the world, but that's another phenomenal thing which is happening in the United States right now. They are today building a growing association of investors who would like it to be unethical and a crime to not, in your disclosures, demonstrate how married you are to fossil fuels, because they realize that if you are married to fossil fuels, all your businesses are completely linked to it. You have no future. And that should be displayed in particular to big funds, pension funds and stuff. And that's a movement in the United States in that community, which is completely phenomenal. Another shift that has happened, again in the same country, which is behind us in those issues, is a global change. It's the same all over. That if you calculate the assets of businesses, the business community, previously 80% of the assets were linked to real estate and the stuff that accountants calculated. And only 20% were soft values, how we perceive the brand of that company. Today that has shifted. So today 80% of the value of companies is linked to those soft values, the brand, the prestige of the company, and only 20% is in real estate and concrete money, which makes them extremely vulnerable, and which also creates a temptation to create bubbles, to increase the value, because we don't see the real value. We don't see the real value of surviving in this situation and be proactive. But that value is still there. And this is a huge opportunity for those companies who get the game before the others. I will return to that. So if you return to that same aggressive CEO and ask this person, so what do you think, based on what you already know, without me telling you, you've already picked it up, what do you think will happen to resource costs as we keep losing them? Say, fresh lakes with robust fish stock. As we keep losing them, will prices of them go up or down? As we soon will be maybe 9 billion people, not 6, bidding on the remainders in the system. It's an insult to wait for that response. He knows that too. And if you go down the list, they know it all. It's already a fact. So there will never be a stronger determinator for future success in local governments and businesses than sustainable development. And indeed, since decades, it has already been the strongest long-term trend of all. But not going up straight like that, going like this, of course. But the long-term trend has been stronger than any other long-term trend. Why? Because of the funnel. Survival issues are very influential and very convincing in the end. And we all see what's happening now. More people than I am talking about the financial crisis we are right now looking at. How much of that is really a financial crisis and how much of it is due to that we have actually evaluated the wrong stuff in the situation we're in. And if you ask people deep down in their hearts, they know the truth. They know the answer to that. So we must get out of the confusion amongst details, quibbling about leaves, while the trunk and the branches are destroyed in processes we actually all agree on. Why is this? Why do we have this problem? Because the amount of knowledge today is so big in society at large that we have a tendency to create the silos that the city manager was talking about. And John also mentioned the silos. I prefer to call them drill holes, because you can virtually see all those experts drilling deeper and deeper down into ever increasing knowledge of detail until only the feet are sticking up of all those experts. There's no connection at the level of their heads. They don't have a clue what's going on in the other drill holes. At the time when I launched or founded the Natural Step 20 years ago, I was head of a cancer clinic and a unit of cancer scientists. And at that time we said, isn't it a pity at this university hospital that we have so many frontline researchers who are actually up and running at top levels globally, and we don't know that? Why don't we lecture to each other? And Bosse, one of my friends, got the task of organizing a lecture series whereby all the professors were going to explain to the others what they were doing. And I was supposed to explain that I was working with differentiation induction of malignant cells from chronic lymphocytic leukemias and myelodysplastic syndromes to people who were radiologists, for instance. And each of us were scared stiff to be perceived as superficial in the eyes of the others. So when we spoke about what was going on deep down in our drill holes, we made very certain that nobody understood one word of what we were saying. And eventually this turned into a completely meaningless endeavor. Nobody was there. It was irrelevant. So everybody was back into their drill holes. Only a few people who didn't really know what to do were sitting there attending those meaningless meetings. A few were good, of course. I'm exaggerating a bit. At that same clinic, we had the example of the opposite, a wonderful example of cooperation with shared mental models. Very easy to understand. Mrs. Anderson is going to die because she has cancer, unless we cure her. This is called a clinical conference. It works each time. In a clinical conference, you need the radiologist because you want to know the distribution of the tumor. And it must be exact, using the frontline science we have today. And then you need the pathologist, not some sloppy definition, this is cancer, yeah, we want to know exactly what cellular type it is. And then we need the surgeon, the medical doctor, the physiotherapist, the nurse. We need the social worker because the whole family must be mobilized, Mrs. Anderson, behind her, for her to put up with this tough treatment. And today we treat far above 50%, and we cure them. And by cure, I mean cure. They live normal lives and die of something else at a high age without prescriptions against their cancer, okay? So we cure them, far above 50%. And not one of those professional groups can do that on their own. We need each other. Why does it work this time? Because we have a shared mental model. It's flesh and blood. It's very clear. It's not diffuse. It's not vague. It's Mrs. Anderson. We can look at her. We can say hello to her, and most of us have. And we put her ahead of us as healthy. What does that mean? Well, everybody around the table knows that means that the last cancer cell is killed without killing Mrs. Anderson or any other organ system, so that she can live and enjoy the pleasures. We all have that shared mental model. And now, with that very clear, simple model, it's possible to haul out from the drill holes the smartest possible knowledge to make that happen. Look at it together, and the learning is phenomenal. You learn more than ever if you are together with other people, having a shared mental model, and work on it like that. And then you repeat it over and over again, and everybody becomes more and more skilled in what's going on in the other drill holes as well. Why? Because there is a meaning for what we do together. Today, the patient is the global social society, dying gradually from the deadly disease unsustainability. And to cure that patient, we need city managers, economists, engineers, politics. We need them all in their drill holes. But how can they possibly cure this patient if they don't have a clue how to define what it is they want for the future with the patient? How do you define sustainability? And to that end, we needed a framework. And this framework must build on the system. Dublin in the global social society in the world. Success is, what do you find aspirational, inspirational, something to desire for in the future within sustainability constraints, of course. If you love your visions, why putting it outside constraints for sustainability? So how do we define sustainability then? And then you need a box of strategic guidelines for a stepwise approach while earning money and other resources all the way, so you don't go bankrupt on your way. And now you can foster your actions to be strategic. And now you can develop the tools you need to foster your actions to be strategic, to arrive at success in the system. And it's extremely important that we don't confuse those elements with one another. So in this learning dialogue, which is the most systematic that have been pursued, and that Natural Step was only a partner in, it's a growing number of universities and businesses and local governments across the globe, we defined the first system level with regard to conservation laws and thermodynamics, and this is not a pedagogical event, so I'll just tell you we did that, and we in consensus. Why can this world work with sun energy and plants? How can we expect to live here for around 2.5 billion more years?
in sustainability if we take care of the planet, of course. And we had a consensus on that. And then we asked, based on that consensus, now we must approach the second level. How can we define sustainability principles? Well, why is sustainability a problem? Because we are destroying the planet. So we went on asking, by what basic mechanisms do we destroy it? And we realized the following 4. Number 1, we are gradually behaving in a way that allows mined materials that were originally in the Earth's crust to systematically increase in concentration as waste in the system. We never say that. Instead, we say fossil carbon dioxide and climate change, phosphates in lakes, cadmium in kidneys. And we go on adding stuff amongst the leaves of interrelationships. And we send scientists out to conferences, and the ones working with climate change don't meet toxicologists of kidneys. They have different conferences. So the basic flaw of design of society is never put on the table. We organize ourselves such that mined materials are allowed to systematically increase in concentration. And that's inherently unsustainable, and all scientists agree. Second, we don't only destroy the system like that, which we will not continue to do in the future, of course, by mined materials. We produce compounds ourselves in such amounts and such qualities that they too increase in concentration. So it's not only a net input of elements that causes systematic increase of waste in the system, but it's combinations of elements in our production processes and incineration processes and so forth. But we never say that. Instead we say PCB, DDT, diogens, freons, phthalates, chlorparaffines, bromine organic anti-inflammables, dioxins, and we send out scientists to look at each of those one by one because they do different impacts. And scientists who are looking at eutrophy don't meet the scientists who are looking at the erosion of the ozone layer, but it's the same flaw. We ask the wrong questions. So chemicals too are systematically increasing in the system. Number 3, we are not only polluting the system more and more, which is what is sustainability, by 2 different mechanisms. We are also removing the system physically with bulldozers, chainsaws, asphalt, and far too large fish boats. But we never say that. Instead, we say deforestation in Brazil, or we add some components of that we are aware of, some monocultures here or there, not so much in our own home yard. Instead of systematically looking at it, are we or are we not gradually removing the system physically? And the 4th element is that we are systematically eroding the social glue, the glue between people, the stories of meaning, which is actually the trust between people. That's what we erode by not ensuring that people get their needs met at the global level. Not only in our families, not only in our companies, but even the supply chains from Nigeria. We don't even ask the question. So growing geopolitical tensions and anger is growing in the system, and we are declining in trust between each other. So by just studying the system at that bird's eye level, it was impossible to arrive at the scientifically and verified, robust definition of sustainability. When Dublin is sustainable in the future, or Stockholm, or Bank of America, they don't contribute to violating that first principle, that second principle, that third principle, or the 4th. We have tried over and over again to identify some kind of sustainability impact that would not be related to any of those, or that would not be triggered as an idea of fantasy in a group session, and we have not yet come up with some, but if we would just add that principle. It doesn't change the way of thinking. We have needed, since this is a scientific consensus process, to change the phraseology many times, because in science we don't vote. It's enough with one scientist to come up with a flaw. This is a flaw, and then the whole world had to change, and that has happened 4 extremely painful times. But this is what we have today, and the basic elements were still virtually the same, but it has been refined in that process. Now we can put those ahead of us as the trunk and the branches of checkmate. Checkmate in Dublin, or sustainability in Dublin can only be defined at the level of principle, because conditions will change. If I would ask anyone here to determine exactly how much wind power you would like to have in the future, or exactly what kind of agricultural systems we would have in place, you would not like that question. You would not regard me as serious. Why? Because conditions will change. What is a good energy solution today will be hopelessly obsolete tomorrow. So how do you play chess if you don't know how checkmate will look like? By principles. So far away from checkmate, you can still approach those principles. And it's a mistake, it's an intellectual mistake to lock on the target too early in that kind of game. So you choose early moves that are flexible and smart with regard to any option for sustainability later on. And then eventually, as you approach sustainability, you can lock on the target at the last moves and become sustainable. To that end, we must not confuse sustainability principles with what we do. For instance, a lot of people say recycling is a principle of sustainability. It's not. It's something we do. It belongs to the fourth level of the five. We shouldn't recycle plutonium or CFCs. We should phase them out with regard to the second principle. Certain things should be recycled. Or biofuels or renewable energy is a principle of sustainability. It's not. Turning to biofuels is something we do. Why? Because we want to comply with the first principle, that carbon dioxide from fossil fuels are systematically increasing. But if we do that in a way that destroys all forests, we are violating the third principle. Or if we do it in a way that we produce corn to give us biofuels and thereby see food prices go up, and then having starving people not affording the food, we are violating the fourth principle by renewable energy. So renewable energy is something we do, and that should be put in the context of how we define where we want to be. Otherwise, the modeling won't happen. So it's important how we define those issues. May I just add that those principles for checkmate or winning in football or sustainability must be necessary. They must be enough, otherwise there are gaps in the thinking. They must be general, so that the drill holes or silos can talk to one another. They must be concrete, so that they actually guide the thinking. And they must be distinct, each covering its area, otherwise they won't work. And the principles I gave you are the only ones designed to meet all those criteria. There are many principles for sustainability, but only these ones are designed to do the backcasting thing. And now we can be strategic, moving stepwise to comply with such principles. And that's called the ABCD methodology that we are going to do later on today. How many in this room has ever been unpacking a Christmas present, which is a family game, and now this person is reading from the box because you are supposed to play together? How many has ever encountered something that is similar to that in this room? Not more than that? Well, quite a few. In Sweden, everyone has done that once in a while because it's so cold and everybody's in, and every now and then we unpack a family game and then you read from the box. Next question. How many has understood, of you have understood the rules when they were read out that first time from the box? Now I see more recognition, right? It's like somebody from March has written something completely impossible to understand. And then 5 minutes later you are playing the game, and then all the ahas begin, aha, aha, aha. And eventually you don't even think about the rules, it's just about winning. You have already got the rules in your head, and it's only by playing by rules you really get them, the deeper sense of them. And we are extremely fast, system thinkers as we are, to pick up rules, but we need to play. That's why we're going to play with those rules a bit later. Just to make it brief, the art part is just to share some overall knowledge into our language. You already knew what I've been telling you, but now we must have a language that we don't misunderstand each other. That's A, with some ahas and some uncertainties that you need to get explained so that you trust the game before you start playing it. B, assess where you are today on the board from a point of winning. How far away from winning am I? Well, the challenges and problems with regard to winning, not with regard, as the city manager said, with regard to how we looked before. Because then you are stuck again in recycling. We recycled 14% before. Now we are going to recycle 17%. Are we? Is it even needed? Well, look at the goal. What is it you want to do? And what should be recycled and what should not be recycled? So that you don't invest in something that will only cost you money and that will deprive other things where the money would be better spent from resources. So we must put it into the context of where we want to be. That's B, a long list of challenges. C, create a list of opportunities for the future, regardless how much it costs. Where are the possible solutions for Dublin in the future? As a brainstorming session. And now comes D. Select those aspects from the C list that should be done relatively early on. Beginning a plan. The first smart chess moves. How is that determined? By answering yes to 3 questions, just like chess players do it. Is this moving towards attacking the king of the other person? Is it a flexible platform, depending a bit what he does in different directions, so that I don't lock my mind into one specific assumption of what this player will do on the other side? And the third, am I careful enough with the pieces, or am I sacrificing too much because I don't want to go bust in the process? And it's by having yes to all those that you play chess or play sustainability. And now we can go down to action, and we have shown, we begin with few businesses in Sweden. IKEA was the first, who had huge problems, huge costs related to this. They were hit hard by Greenpeace and others. They were shocked, they had found it difficult to sleep, and we were recruited and we helped them, and eventually they came on top of it. So they are really good players now. I only show you this picture to say that we have considerable experience with top management around the world, and this is a generic framework. We have shown that it works each time, and top managers are extremely clever to draw smart conclusions with regard to chess games, because they were born strategists. That's where very often why they are having that job. And now we just expand the arena a bit, we make them aware, and we have seen how they gradually decline with regard to problems, and then they allow their competitors to hit the walls of the funnel instead. This is a saying that I heard only a few months ago from the world's largest, he's the founder of the world's largest flooring company, that we have gradually moved to earn more and more money with this framework, not at the cost of social or ecological systems, but at the cost of our competitors who still haven't got it. Referring back to the competence issue more than the value issue that I was talking about initially. This is from Leif Johansson, current CEO of Volvo. At the time he was leading Electrolux, and he was recently stating in a public speech that they earned billions at Electrolux by doing their investment programs in line with this framework, allowing their competitors to have bad luck all the time. And he does that quote, you know, bad luck. It's not about bad luck, it's about foreseeing problems that will happen in this funnel and being more clever by gradually approaching the principles. Based on interviews of businesses doing this, we have learned that what they appreciate the most are the following. One is, besides, hitting the walls of the funnel, of course, to be more competitive, that's what they always want. But besides those, there are a few things. One is that the resource potential is huge within the constraints of those principles. And we don't know that unless we understand the principles. Then we can calculate the resource potential for energy. The sun gives us, for instance, 10,000 times more energy than the whole global expenditure of energy, all categories included. How do we know that? By just looking at the energy influx and taking into account that we are not going to violate any of those principles. So how much potential? Then we have not calculated geothermal, which has an almost as large potential. Heat from the inner parts of the world. So people who don't understand how to define the goal, instead departure in planning from the constraints of today's technologies. How efficient is an auto engine in a car out there? Well, 28%. Why don't we make it 32% and spending a lot of money on it, instead of asking what are the potentials for the future and how should we stepwise harvest that potential, which is a much more exciting question. Another example is solving trade-offs, which is a huge problem today in businesses. If you suggest something, do this investment. Immediately someone will pop up and say, should I do that by sustainability reasons? Haven't you thought about that this is bad for that other reason then? So the question is it better than it is better, or is it better than it is better? And if you ask scientists that question, they will immediately divide into two groups. One saying that it's probably better and the other that is better. And since scientists are generally trained to be honest, they generally finish their evaluations by saying, but how it really is, the future science must deal with, because we can't guarantee that this is right. And the reason is that it's multidimensional. I will give you an example from business. IKEA wanted to launch low energy lamps, and they contain more mercury than the others. Well, shall we save some energy at the cost of polluting a little bit more with mercury, or is it vice versa? And scientists divided into two groups, until it was a strategist, a manager at IKEA who solved the problem and said, do we in the future pollute with mercury? No. Do we waste energy in light? No. So how do we get there? We must regard whatever we do as a stepping stone to arrive at the position where we are healthy. Because if we choose between plague or cholera, we will get either. And they found a much smarter way of getting to completely sustainable light. They found a Chinese manufacturer who had 1/3 of the content of mercury of Osram and Philips and other lamps. And then they made a deal with him that included systematic improvement towards no mercury in lamps, since that violates the first of the principles here. Another example is Whistler, local government in Canada, who is going to be the host of the next Winter Olympics. And they were challenged by people saying that now when we have the world's cameras onto us, we need to come up with some much more sustainable energy systems. And the utility company said, why don't you build a pipeline for natural gas from the west coast to Whistler, so that you really do something good? And the mayor of Whistler said, why should we build a pipeline of natural gas? Because it has less carbon in it per energy unit. And it pollutes less by other reasons too. So you mean it will bring us one step towards less pollution if we do that pipeline? That's correct. And then the mayor said, then what? And the head of the utility company said, what do you mean then what? Well, it still violates the first principle. It's still mined from the Earth's crust, and it will increase carbon dioxide in the atmosphere as well, though to a lower extent, and it's a limited resource. So in what way will that move help us move to completely sustainable energy systems? And unless you can respond to that question, we can't make the deal. And this led to a completely new deal with the downsizing of the pipeline to free money for other things, which was jointly merged into a plan, so that they could harvest the benefits of reducing carbon dioxide without getting married to an inherently unsustainable idea. Third point, it's wonderful for community building to have a shared, precise definition of where you want to be. It's like playing football. It's much more fun to play football with your friends if you all have the same idea what it's all about. Scoring more than the other team is doing. It's much more fun if you understand that that's what it's all about. And third point, if you know how to define the end point, then you can have an integrated vision and you can run management accordingly. You can't if you don't have a precise definition. And this is how it's done. So you have the sustainability principles as outer constraints when you produce your vision of a sustainable Dublin. And then you have, and that's the 4 principles I talked about. Then you have your compelling vision, which is very close to your 6 themes. Very elegant, or rather 5 themes, because one of them are the sustainability principles. I've now put them as constraints around the whole image. But it's very nice sayings about culture and the social dimension and so forth of an attractive Dublin in the future. And then you have the strategic goals. If you have this vision, and these are the sustainability principles, then you have your issues. You have 10 issues, which are very close to that. If you now backcast from this to the current situation, you have your flagships, you have your plans about waste management, about climate change measures, about water management, and so forth. All of it is one of the most beautiful matches to this way of thinking I've seen. So what could this framework possibly add? A few elements. One is that we could do a full gap analysis to see what's still missing in the plan, because you have robust principles that define the endpoint. Second, all the components that you have been elaborating with could be made more cohesive. If you analyze each of them by the same principles, you come up with aspects as challenges, aspects as opportunities, and now you can interlink them much clearer if each of them are analyzed by a robust framework like that. Third, the stepwise approach. You can begin to analyze each flagship and each planned investment as a stepping stone in relation to other suggested stepping stones, so that you do not only respond to the question, is this good in itself, but is it a smart move with regard to the costs, with reference to the other moves we need to do to fill the gap? It's another question. And to ask that question, you must have that kind of framework. This is a saying from the perhaps most proactive business company in the whole world. It's a president there, and I just heard it recently and just wanted to say they are extremely clever in applying this framework. And now I will move over more to regions and cities. No, one more slide. 100 companies have been reviewed by Bob Willard in the United States. The first category of companies are pre-compliance. They are criminal. They don't even comply with the rules, so they are criminals. The second is not criminals anymore, but they are certainly not proactive. It's the largest group. Then he finds a third group which are beyond compliance, and he categorized them as eco-efficiency. They have at least learned to reduce resource throughput per sales. And they are already, by only that, 38% higher in profit than the others. Conservative numbers. The fourth, which is what I'm talking about, how to integrate this fully, extremely rare. It's Interface, it's IKEA, Patagonia perhaps, Roman Haas, a few we have worked with, but very few have arrived at that refined level. Then we have the fifth, which is like another step. Organizations created to save the world, they are completely of no interest here. Then we have the fourth level. How do we now, once we understand how to move like a chess player, how can we apply it for other things than business? Well, sectors. We've done this in agriculture, forestry, you do the same. Sustainable forestry in Bangladesh, what would that entail? Or agriculture? In what way does it today violate basic principles of sustainability? What are the possibilities for the future? And how could we move like a chess player, step by step, to comply with those principles? And we have shown that it works in any sector. Consequently, you can use it in regions. Now you can have all the actors and all the sectors of a region. You make your B plan, your B list of problems, your C list of solutions, compare notes, and suddenly you can have integrated approaches. And now you understand also the reason why we can't have just disparate ways of looking at it. If you have 6 themes in Dublin and your companies have 2 themes and someone else has 8 and others don't have a theme at all and so forth, it's extremely difficult to compare notes. But if all of them are phrasing the main challenges and the main opportunities and the main smart early moves by the same language, you can compare notes and find possibilities for integration. And consequently, this framework is growing faster than anywhere else on this arena, the local government and the city arena. It began in one Swedish municipality, Övertorneå. Now we have 70 local governments sharing information, playing chess together like this in Sweden. And now it's growing faster than anywhere else in the United States and in Canada. And into American Planning Association, the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, all kinds of bodies doing it. And this saying comes from that mayor in Whistler, who had so many tools, so many concepts, and they have been running with it for years and have been very clever in Whistler. But eventually they reached the point where they couldn't proceed because there was no cohesion and they did not have a gap analysis. So they needed something to bring it all together. And we did that together with them. I think it's 6 or 7 years now. And they recently won the United Nations prize for being the most proactive community in the whole world. Finally, a few words about tools. There are so many tools and concepts for sustainable development that they themselves have begun to be perceived as confusing. What are all those tools doing? And I just want to remind you, there's only one framework that encapsulates it all, and that's not invented by me. I have been a humble contributor to a consensus approach, a global consensus approach, to arrive at the FSSD framework. And since I initiated it, I was invited by UNEP in Paris, together with the founders or the pioneers of those tools, to study how they relate to one another. And we did it in this way, of course. We imagined that we were leading any organization to comply with the 4 principles, using the 5 levels of the framework. And then we asked, in what way can ISO 14001 help us to get there? And what can ISO 14001 not do? And we asked the same questions with all the other tools and published this. And the conclusion is that there are many good tools and concepts, and they all have their different strengths and gaps, but none can replace what I'm talking about now, a fully structured systems perspective. But if you have one like that, you can make better use of the already existing tools, because then you can inform them to please you, what it is you want. So you use the big plan, the big framework, to organize what it is you want to do, your challenges, your solutions, and your stepwise approach. And then you select the tools you need and inform them to really play in your hands. And that's what the framework can help you do. Finally, just a few words. We have a whole international scientific program now where the core is to refine the 5 elements even more, the 5 layers of the framework even more. It will be done in a 10-year study, mainly founded by 5 Swedish agencies, the Swedish EPA, the Energy Agency, and 3 others, that have merged forces to support a systematic refining, even further refining of the framework. And then the petals of the flower are universities from across the globe studying their respective stuff by use of the same framework. So we have got a true interdisciplinary cooperation across universities in the world. And these are the founders of the program. The Natural Step is one of those. The intellectual structure is the ABCD you've already learned. The methodological structure is just to systematically move from the issues they need to apply the framework for through theory, methodologies, and applications in learning loops. And the institutional structure is that we have TNS teams around the world who can facilitate, but many others than TNS these days. We have communities already doing it. We have businesses already working like this, and we have a growing number of local governments. And now you see the point. You can move from the big picture through the ABCD analysis, come up with B lists and C lists, and then if you need more refined tools, system dynamic modeling, management systems, indicators, we have scientists from across the globe who can respond to the questions and sharing information. Many often you don't need that, but if you need it, it's a nice feeling to know that this is a sort of growing clinical conference across the globe. These are just a few examples of petals. This is mineral flows of society, regional planning, all the tools you need. Industrial ecology is done in Finland. Adjunct biomass growth as a resource of energy in Australia. Healthcare in Toronto. Water management around the River Rhine in the Netherlands and the Nijmegen University. Earth and ecosystem science was satellite governance, or what do you call it? Auditing or satellite analysis of the Amazons. And X is, of course, Dublin. Now we're going to play the game to bring in some more flesh to the bones. I've just displayed a sort of smorgasbord with dishes. You will get the PDF file. If I have said anything that you find compelling, you can look it up in that picture book that we will send you out and you can read it. But now we're going to play the game. And I want you to imagine that you were all city planners in Stockholm from different political parties, and you were exposed to the following question: shall we or shall we not build a beltway around Stockholm, on all the parks around Stockholm, because traffic congestion is so tough? And immediately the political establishment divided into two groups. One group wanted to build this beltway around Stockholm, the others said no. It's not particularly nice to say no as your raison d'être. Anyhow, those were the two parties. And they were so angry with one another that they called for this medical doctor to try to resolve the situation. And I was there, and I explained the framework, and then we had lunch. And then after lunch, one of them said, okay, can you apply that framework now for the Beltway project around Stockholm? It was called the Dennis package by the inventor of the idea, the Dennis package. And I said, I would be a stupid, stupid man if I first explained to you the need for this framework to be used by top executives, top managers, real strategists. And you guys are planning traffic systems as part of your everyday life. Then I would put myself as a medical doctor in front of you running that model for traffic planning. Never, ever. But I would be happy to be your humble secretary while you run the model. And A was just going through the framework and how it works, and then we had lunch. Now let's proceed to B. Let's assess today's situation in Stockholm from a point of winning. Is there anything at all, I asked these guys in this room, city planners, is there anything at all that the Stockholm traffic helps bringing from the Earth's crust, mined in any way or drilled for in any way, and which is then dispersed as increasing waste in the biosphere, in the total system? And what would that be if you can find of any such element or material? And what do you think they said as the first response when I asked them, does the Stockholm traffic bring anything up from the Earth's crust and eventually spews it out as increasing waste in the system? And what would that be? What do you think they came to think about first? And I was completely, sincere. I just wanted them to respond. And I had a pen in my hand. What do you think they said? Yeah, so fossil fuels came first. So I wrote that. Oil. And then I said, well, what do we use oil for? And of course, we're not going to do this in the Germanic way. So they immediately said, fossil fuels, we need it for fuels. Anything else? What do you think they said when I asked, do we use oil for anything but as fuels, leading to carbon dioxide directly? What do you think they said? Do we use oil for anything else but propelling our cars to feed into the Stockholm traffic system? Making cars, materials, and I got plastics, and I got fibers, and I got all kinds of stuff that the oil went into, and tires and so forth. And we made a long list, and eventually it ceased to be interesting to exploit more. And the funny thing is, none of them said paper clips at the traffic office, for instance. So when the brain is informed by major flows, by major principles, the major flows surface, and the small nitty-gritty stuff does not come up. So the minds worked beautifully well. We didn't need to deal with the nitty-gritty. The essentials came up. So then continue to ask them, still under the first principle, so what was it the clever Stockholmers did in the sea, on the sea list, that avoided that problem? Why do we no longer in the future spew out fossil carbon dioxide into the atmosphere? What was it they did? And what do you think they said when I asked that question? Or are we married to the idea of allowing fossil carbon dioxide to increase forever in the atmosphere? So what did they say? Any idea? Yep. So I got a whole array of new ways of propelling cars, electric cars, battery cars, biofuels, growing list. Good. Then I turned back to first principle, but under B. Anything else from the Earth crust, which the Stockholm traffic brings up from the Earth crust through mining, and which is now increasing in concentration in the system. Anything else but oil and CO2 related to it. What would that be? And what do you think they said? Sorry? I'm sorry, I don't hear it. Okay. I think everyone heard that now. Any other things coming from the Earth's crust that were mined originally? Metals of various kinds. And that also made us enter a very interesting dialogue. Is iron increasing in the system? And they didn't know. And then I could tell them, no, because iron is so abundant in Mother Nature that the iron that we allow rust away does not increase concentrations. And then they asked, what about lead? Certainly increasing. Copper? Certainly increasing. And actually we have numbers on that. So suddenly they realized certain metals are increasing fast in concentration because they are very scarce in natural systems in relation to our flows of that metal. Whereas a metal like aluminum cannot increase in concentration in natural systems. Why? Because Mother Nature is more or less made of aluminum. And our total mining of aluminum is futile in comparison to what Mother Nature throws onto us every year from volcano eruptions and weathering on rock and so forth, because it is so abundant. So suddenly we got a very subtle discussion of which metals we must avoid and which metals belong to the future and so forth. But I won't go into that. Turn to second principle. Do any chemicals increase in natural systems because of the existence of the Stockholm traffic system? And what would those be? Any examples at all? Any chemicals? Any combinations of elements that appear? Yeah, various kinds of combinations from the emission. Some of them carbon-related, others that are not carbon-related. Do you know any substance coming out from emission pipes that are not related to carbon at all? Yes, exactly. Sulfurous compounds, I heard that, various of them, and NOx, various combinations of nitrogen and oxygen, which causes eutrophy and asthma and acid rain and an increased concentration of ozone indirectly. Any other chemicals that do not necessarily come from the emission pipe? What do you think they said? Or is the Stockholm traffic only contributing to such chemicals that are emitted from the pipe to cause in concentration? Or do you think there might be some other chemical increasing because of the existence of the Stockholm traffic system? It's difficult. If there are no chemists here, it's difficult. They looked a bit uncertain like you did, but eventually they began to say, maybe some plastic additives from textiles and so forth. Yeah. Maybe some components we put in our tires. Some of them had read about that. So eventually, after we'd worked for some while, we had a long list of chemicals, mainly from the manufacturing of cars, but in the products and materials, but also emissions from factories producing those things, increasing, dioxins and so forth. What was it the clever Stockholmers did? And now we turned around to solutions. No scarce metals are increasing in concentration anymore in the future. So we are not only curbed CO2 increasing, but also we have no metals are increasing in concentration and no chemicals are increasing in concentration from NOx emissions, for instance. Why? What was it the clever Stockholmers did standing there in the vision in the future? How did they curb their own contribution to metals increasing and chemicals increasing? What was it they did? Sorry? Yeah, they reduced some traffic. What could they have instead? How can you... Sorry? Yeah, trains. So much more effective means of communication certainly surfaced on the solution list. And trains without emission pipes was even more good then. But then some of them said, where does the energy come from to the train? Which led us to fossil fuels and nuclear power, and they sorted that out as well on the list. Any other solutions but more efficient modes of transport that requires a less resource throughput per utility? Cycles, yeah. Still other modes of transport, cycles. Any other? Please speak up, because, you know, first of all, I have a language problem. I have to translate everything I say. And secondly, I'm over 60, so I have some difficulties, but I'm cheating with this. So just speak up. What other examples? What was it the Stockholmers did besides turning to some smarter modes of transport, of mass transport? That's right. Any others? Well, we won't make this in a Germanic way. Again, they came up with more IT. Perhaps people are more commonly living relatively close to where they're working. Maybe they are allowed to work a bit from home, from IT, so that they don't need to commute all the time. It was carpools. It was all kinds of smart stuff. And it surfaced on the C list. Third, does the Stockholm traffic in any way encroach physically on natural areas? Not only polluting them with mined materials and chemicals, but does the Stockholm traffic in any way also remove natural systems physically, directly or indirectly? And what do you think they gave me as examples of that? Yeah, the footprint of the infrastructure itself with all the roads, and they are systematically moving out into forest and agricultural stuff, but also the indirect footprint from strip mining to get access to the metals that feed into the traffic system. And we got a long list. What was it they did? Well, smarter modes of transport, more IT again, more rain trails than cars. So eventually they saw that a number of the solutions on the C list they had come up with to solve fuel problems and material problems also helped us solve the encroaching on natural areas problems. And we call that synergetic solutions that help many other solutions. Solution multipliers is another term that is mounted in England. And then we talked about the social web. What about people? Do people in any way suffer today from the traffic system, the way it's designed? Give me some examples of people ending up in different problems because of the traffic.